Well, I love using blood sugar stability as a performance tool
Mhm.
and a health optimization tool because we can easily see from our own data, from our own biofeedback when we know how to do it, how we better perform when our blood sugar levels are balanced.
Mhm.
And and by better performance, I mean our energy is better, our sleep is better, our mood can be better, our mind, we can have more mental clarity, less brain fog, we can have less cravings. So we're more we feel more in control of our bodies and our health, our mind and our mood and our energy when we have more stable blood sugar. So I think
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of the Sleep Like a Boss podcast. I'm Annika, Carroll, your host, and we're going to talk about one topic today that I think is one of the most underrated problems when it comes to sleep issues, and that is blood sugar imbalances. And I have Laurie Villarreal, and I just said it wrong, Laurie Villarreal here, who is a board certified health coach and a functional coach. And she was an endurance athlete and has now for about 20 years worked in the health and fitness industry. And she helps women balance blood sugar so they can balance their hormones, they can feel better, they have energy, the brain fog goes away, all these things that we see women struggle with a lot. And I'm so happy, Laurie, to have you on the show.
I'm so excited to be here. I love this topic and I'm always happy to share.
Awesome. And you work with women, um, even using real-time data. So you have your clients on what are called continuous glucose monitors, and we'll talk about that later, but you really work
Mhm.
with women to understand their blood sugar, their metabolism, what is going on, to see how you can improve that with them and just really make them feel better and get on top of their health. And maybe we can start with what is an imbalance in blood sugar? Why does blood sugar need to be balanced? Just to maybe frame it and give people the understanding.
Yeah, well, our blood sugar is fluctuating throughout the day. That's natural. It's naturally going up and down. Our body has what it wants to be in balance or homeostasis. Our body is always trying to find that middle point that it can come back to. And it's things like foods and our lifestyle that influence our blood sugar levels. And our blood sugar is important because it's fuel, it's what gives us energy. So the foods we eat can affect our blood sugar, increasing our blood sugar or even decreasing our blood sugar levels, and also as well as our lifestyle. So blood sugar imbalance can happen when the things in our life, our foods, our activities,
Mhm.
our stress levels, different things in our life influence our blood sugar balance. And that can happen. I've seen this, no matter the age or the health status, we can have imbalanced blood sugar levels without recognizing it. And I know a lot of women or a lot of people can probably recognize that feeling of like hangriness or shakiness or that blood sugar high that you may have had after eating something sugary, or that blood sugar crash that you may have felt after maybe having something sweet and few hours later it crashes, maybe even a crash after caffeine. We think it's the caffeine could actually, in fact, be our blood sugar crashing. So these kind of highs and lows, or if you imagine a toddler having a blood sugar high, right? Like this is, so it's natural for our blood sugar to fluctuate throughout the day. But with our lifestyle, with our modern lifestyles and foods, I would say especially lifestyle, we can find our blood sugar being a lot harder to balance. So our body is struggling more than it used to, or more than it wants to bring it back to that balanced baseline. And this creates symptoms in the body. So it's not just an issue with diabetics. The difference between just regular blood sugar imbalance and say somebody who has diabetes, diabetes is when you have a much harder time to to bring your blood sugar back in balance. So that's further down the spectrum than where a lot of women might begin, which is just having what I call wonky blood sugar. Yeah, so it's something for all of us to think about, actually.
And I think there were two things that I want to kind of point out that you just said that I think are really important. The one thing is wonky blood sugar isn't type 2 diabetes, by far not, but it's the beginning of a journey, right? It's a spectrum. You said it's on the spectrum. So there could be, if I don't address it over time, I'm potentially walking further down that spectrum towards type 2 diabetes.
Absolutely. Because the body wants to find balance. It's every day, all day long, it's working to bring your body back in balance, whether it's your blood sugar or it's other hormones in the body. And when it's doing that, the harder we make it, right? So, if we're having blood sugar highs and lows all day long, our body is working so much harder to bring it back into balance. And if we can imagine it being that hard for years and decades, right? The body will begin to have a harder and harder and harder time. So it is a spectrum. It can start out with blood sugar imbalance, and it can progress down the road to reactive hypoglycemia. So it could end up turning into pre-diabetes, and then we can see diabetes down the road. But prior to that, and even the journey from wonky blood sugar to diabetes can be very long, and also could go undiagnosed. You may not have any diagnosis until you have diabetes, because it's a long journey, but it's a journey of the body continually trying to bring back balance, but we're not helping it. We're not making it easier for our body in some way.
Absolutely. And why, apart from the fact that this might be my first stepping stone to more metabolically unhealthy living and potentially diabetes down the road, why is it so important now when we're women, maybe in our 30s, 40s, maybe in our 50s? Why now, if there is no diabetes on the horizon, it's not running in my family, maybe I don't think I am predisposed maybe in that way. Why would it be so important to look for blood sugar stability?
Well, I love using blood sugar stability as a performance tool and a health optimization tool, because we can easily see from our own data, from our own biofeedback, when we know how to do it, how we better perform when our blood sugar levels are balanced. And by better performance, I mean our energy is better, our sleep is better, our mood can be better, our mind, we can have more mental clarity, less brain fog, we can have less cravings. So we feel more in control of our bodies and our health, our mind and our mood and our energy when we have more stable blood sugar. So I think right away for a lot of women, and I imagine women who are listening to this podcast right now who are interested in health and sleep, blood sugar balance is an important tool for optimizing that. But as well, I would say even far before you have a diagnosis, it's also influencing our hormones. And so women right now who maybe you're trying to get pregnant, maybe you just want a regular period, maybe you're in perimenopause, maybe you're in menopause, our blood sugar health and our blood sugar balance, and the better it is, leads to better hormonal health as well. So this is something that I think a lot of women want as well, especially as our hormones are fluctuating. So getting a better understanding of our blood sugar, I think, is like the basics when it comes to having a better understanding of how to keep our hormones in check.
I totally agree. And myself being in perimenopause now, I'm 43 turning 44, and I can feel like, I would say over the past 2 years, my blood sugar is not as stable as it has been before. Like I have to, but I feel it, but I have to really work on certain things. I'm sure we're going to get to that to make sure that my energy isn't like that, that I'm not going to start eating whatever comes close to me at some point, right? It's like, oh, we're
Mhm.
just going to binge on that because the blood sugar's just all over the place. Does it, is that something that you see too, that our ability to keep our blood sugar stable changes for women over time throughout their lifetime?
It changes for women over time, but it also changes for women throughout their menstrual cycle. So for
Mm-hmm.
cycling women, um, we can notice a shift from different phases in the cycle because of the different hormones that are supporting blood sugar regulation. And those hormones are estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, and they support blood sugar regulation in different ways. But even throughout the menstrual cycle, you can find when those hormones go lower in our bodies, blood sugar regulation can be much harder. So that would be like the luteal phase and the beginning of the menstrual phase. And this is often when women tend to have cravings, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when blood sugar regulation becomes tougher, those cravings go up, right? Because it becomes more important for us to think about what helps keep our body in balance. And then, as well as we get into perimenopause and menopause, and those hormones are fluctuating or declining, then we also will notice a difference in how well our bodies can balance our blood sugar levels. And then we need, it's, I consider it I consider these symptoms and changes that we feel just a sign that something needs to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we start noticing more cravings or we start noticing something different. Hot flashes can even be related to our blood sugar balance, for example. This just is a sign from our bodies that, okay, what we were doing before is not working anymore. It's time to find a new rhythm, a new path. And that's what's quite great about blood sugar too, is that it's also sending us those signs and signals.
Absolutely. And can you dive into it? You've mentioned some symptoms, but maybe we can kind of put them together. Like, how do I know that I have, or that how could I suspect that blood sugar imbalances are what's kind of bothering me?
Well, I've seen blood sugar imbalance affect women in different ways, very different ways. But some of the like classic signs of having wonky blood sugar might be that you have cravings. So you'll have cravings typically for carbs or caffeine, needing an energy boost. You might also have, let's see, mood. I notice a lot of women with mood issues. So that could be feeling like sluggish or low mood. It could also be feeling anxious or that like, yeah, like that feeling you get when you're on a lot of caffeine. A lot of women get just from high blood sugar levels. It can also create more stress in the body, so it can make us feel less resilient, more irritable. So this kind of irritable feeling can sometimes be related to our blood sugar levels. Um, it can also affect our sleep. So not being able to go to sleep is a big one. Not being able to easily fall asleep can be related to blood sugar levels. But most often I see energy cravings. Like if you're struggling with energy, if you're struggling with cravings, and if you're struggling with gaining weight around your midline. Those are some big ones. But you might even notice things like hair loss or more skin issues. Gut disruption is one that I see sometimes in women. Um, and yeah, there's a number. There are a number of symptoms that can pop up that could be tied back to blood sugar dysregulation.
And what causes that? What causes wonky blood sugar?
A lot of things, yeah. So for a long time we thought, or at least I've learned long ago, because I have two parents that are diabetics.
Mhm.
And so I became fascinated with blood sugar in my teens. And way back then, I remember understanding or learning that blood sugar management had a lot to do with our foods and the foods we eat. But a lot of the women that I work with really try to have a healthier life, have a healthier lifestyle already. So they try to eat well, they try to exercise. So they're doing a lot of the things that would typically be recommended for healthier glucose control. Um, but what I see is a lot of times it's stress
Mhm.
that can be influencing our blood sugar more than anything. And it's also the stress that comes in different packages, right? So a lot of times we think of stress as maybe mental or emotional stressors, financial stressors, but it can also be exercise. And exercise is great for glucose control, but I have seen women take it to the point of it not helping their blood sugar control, it actually contributing to wonky blood sugar levels. And then as well as maybe even overeating or undereating,
Mhm.
right? Both, but I see more like going for long periods of time without food for some women can create this kind of wonkiness with their blood sugar. Um, and that tends to happen more with women who already have dysregulated blood sugar. So if you don't have like a regular rhythm of your eating pattern and you're just all over the place, that can also create kind of all over the place glucose levels. But we know sweets, things like sweets, highly processed foods, anything that's going to get to the bloodstream quickly,
Mhm.
highly processed carbs, refined oils, highly refined oils can also be inflammatory. Inflammation in the body. So any type of inflammation in the body can also increase our body's ability to regulate our glucose. So that inflammation could be coming from a number of things. Um, for example, if somebody were to have a lot of gut inflammation, we can also sometimes notice that they have more blood sugar dysregulation. But I also find that the opposite can be true. When you have a lot of blood sugar dysregulation, you can have a lot of gut inflammation. And by calming the blood sugar dysregulation, you also calm the gut. So it can go both ways. But sleep can also be, so sleep can be a disruptor of our glucose levels, not getting
Mhm.
enough, right? Not
Yeah.
restoring our body, not restoring enough can be disrupted to our blood sugar levels, but also having wonky blood sugar throughout the day can disrupt our sleep. So it goes both. So a lot of times that's why I find blood sugar so fascinating because it goes both ways. Blood sugar can create inflammation in the body, but also inflammation in the body can create wonky blood sugar. So I tend to like to look at blood sugar, as we talked about before, through real-time data with real-time data, because then we can see when we can get the body back in balance, how that affects the other systems in the body. And if those other systems are able to calm down because of the blood sugar, better blood sugar balance that we now have. Because there are a lot of things that disrupt our glucose, but then the glucose can disrupt a lot of things as well.
Yeah, and that is, I think that is super important, that kind of interplay, right? And the back and forth, and
Mhm.
where's the chicken, where's the egg, or are they actually both
Mhm.
there at the same time? And then we start somewhere to calm the system down. And I think what you just said is so important. And I think a lot of people don't know that. Yes, food is one big contributor, but don't underestimate stress. And if you're somebody who's ever worn or will wear a continuous glucose monitor, which is a little sensor that you put on your arm and that
Mhm.
tracks um fluctuations, and you can see that on apps. And if you stand, like, let's say, I've had it. I was somewhere out in the grocery store and I was running late and I was in a big line and I had an appointment and I had to go some. And then there was an argument with the people, and then there was, I don't know, somebody checked out wrong. My blood sugar was so high. And I was like, this is only because I'm not going to make it on time to this
Mhm.
appointment. And these people are holding up the whole process here, and I'm just freaking out. And how many, and you think this is totally irrelevant. You're like, this is not life changing or life threatening in any way. No, it is absolutely not. That is totally true. Um, but my body reacted that way, right? And then it shot up. It was so high. And then I think maybe you can talk to that a little. Will the blood sugar then come down and just stay where it needs to go? Or does it do more funky things when it's kind of gone all over the place?
Yeah. That's a good question. Well, also, I want to say that I've had a similar experience. The highest glucose spike that I've ever seen was when a family member had to be rushed to the hospital in the middle of the night. And I've never seen my glucose that high before. But I was in, I was in my survival mode. My body was dumping glucose into, it was like, give you the glucose so you can handle this situation. But I didn't need as much as it was giving me, right? I was like, I did not need that much. Thank you. I'm going to go sit in a hospital right now. I'm not moving my body. And that's what can happen with a lot of people who have, episodes of stress throughout the day, right? And a lot of times it's how we handle and we perceive those stressors. So our thoughts are at play a lot here. And it's also how we've trained our body over time to respond to these stressors, which is something we have control and we can shift. So the question you had about what happens when it goes high like that. So our body, like I had mentioned before, is always trying to bring it back down to baseline, to homeostasis. It wants to bring it back down to baseline. But what tends to happen is when we have such a big spike that our body isn't used to, it overshoots insulin, which is the which is the key that unlocks the cells to get the glucose into them, right? Because glucose is energy. Our body is sending all this glucose into our bloodstream. And for me, it was the middle of the night. I hadn't had any food in several hours. Maybe you hadn't had any food as well. So it wasn't the food that was influencing my glucose levels. It was my body dumping that glucose back into the bloodstream from storage because it thought I needed the energy. And the insulin then comes to get that energy into your cells. And what can happen a lot, or what I see a lot with myself and with clients, is that then it overestimates and it brings a crash. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what you also see, or you've heard of when we have sweets, right? The
Mm-hmm.
blood sugar crash that comes after the sweets. This can also happen with stress as well. So you have that blood sugar spike, and then afterwards you have a crash. And then your body tries to bring it back up to baseline. So eventually, a body that is still capable of finding that baseline again will bring it back up to baseline. And this is where having the real-time data is interesting, because we can see a little bit if your body is able to find a baseline, or if it's just up and down all the time, or if it's coming back to like to stabilize at a certain level. My body was able to do that. And all of our bodies respond a little bit differently. And also it can depend again where you are on that spectrum that we talked about earlier, as to what happens after you have a big blood sugar spike. But when you have a blood sugar crash, we feel it too. We feel the spike. I know I did. For me, a blood sugar spike feels a lot like anxiousness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's like shanky anxiousness. I feel very alert. I feel like I could get things done, but I also don't feel like I have a lot of mental clarity. Like I might be making decisions, but I'm probably am not making my best decisions when I have a blood sugar spike, which we've all seen when people are stressed and not making their best decisions, right? Maybe yelling
Absolutely.
at somebody, maybe like we're not making our best decisions under stress sometimes. But then after comes the crash, and I find that that can be very similar but feel different, and every body is going to feel a little bit different, which again is interesting. When you have real-time data, you can see, okay, I'm in a spike right now, and this is what a spike feels like. You can put the two together, and now I'm in a crash, and this is what a crash feels like for me, and this is what it feels like for me when I'm at baseline, which for a lot of people it feels great. You
Yeah.
feel great.
And do you see that with your clients? Because I see that um quite a bit, that if we have, because you were talking about the inability to fall asleep if we take it to sleep, and then the night wakings, the pesky 3 a.m., 2 a.m.s, that I
Mhm.
often see people's blood sugar dipping.
Yes. Yeah. I've seen both, strangely. I've seen both, but yes, so what I see more often is somebody will have dinner, their blood sugar will increase, and
Mm-hmm.
it won't come down until they're in bed.
Mm-hmm.
So they've gone to bed and their blood sugar comes down, and maybe it has a situation of, like I explained before, where it overshoots and it goes too low, and then the body has to bring it back up to baseline. And what happens when it goes down too low and it brings it back up to baseline, often our body uses hormones like cortisol and adrenaline to bring
Yeah.
it back up. So
Great for sleep.
we're having a little bit of a stress spike in the middle of the night. And hello, that's going to wake you up.
Yeah.
Almost any time that our body is trying to rapidly bring our glucose back up, it's going to wake us up, because that's the same situation when it rapidly increased our glucose for us to, go to the emergency room with an emergency, right? It's preparing us for survival, and that's not what we want in the middle of the night while we're sleeping, right? So these kind of this spike and then crash in the middle of the night, or sometimes it doesn't even have to be a crash, because sometimes I've also seen a woman that might have had dinner, say, quite early.
Yeah.
She had dinner quite early. It remained quite stable. She did not have a spike, but her blood sugar has a tendency to go low at night. So it's like creeping down, creeping down, creeping down, and then in the middle of the night, it goes pretty low, where the body's like, "Ooh, this is way too low. We need to bring things back up." And so it shifts it back up. And then in a woman who has this pattern, there are, of course, other strategies. But there are a few different patterns I've seen at night that are disrupting blood sugar. And again, this all goes back to kind of where you might be on the spectrum, but also different people have different glucose responses. We have our own kind of glucotype, where we respond differently to different foods and different things, and our blood sugar has a different pattern. And I also find that these patterns can be trained. So like I was explaining before, sometimes women have these, under stress, very high glucose spikes, because maybe we've trained our body over time that under stress we need a lot of glucose. I see this with athletes like myself. So when you are having very heavy training and very hard workouts, our body, and especially when you don't have enough food or fuel to fuel those workouts, right? Our body can get in a pattern of knowing, okay, we're stressed. We need to dump tons of glucose into the body to take care of this activity she's going to be doing for the next 2 hours. But that might not always be the case, right? So maybe we've trained our body to have this type of response. And over time, by finding more balance and showing our body what balance looks like and how we can support it to have better balance, I also see that our body can be trained to find homeostasis more easily without needing to call upon cortisol and adrenaline as often.
And that applies, is a question, do you see that people who tend to have more healthy blood sugar levels throughout the day also have more healthy blood sugar levels throughout the night?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think a lot of times it's how we start our day that influences the evening, and
Talk about
even
that
the
a
day
little. Yeah.
before.
Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, so if you can, if you start your day with a blood sugar spike and a crash, you can almost, I would say, I'm almost certain that the rest of your day is going to look wonky, right? Because also cortisol is high in the mornings, because that's natural. That's what happens. But having also a blood sugar spike can contribute to higher cortisol levels as well in the morning. And it just throws off your body's stress response for the rest of the day. And I find that we are much more sensitive. Like our bodies are a little bit more sensitive and alert throughout the day. So it's going to be more sensitive to carbohydrates, to sugars, to caffeine, to a lot of things that we might not respond to in the same way on a day when we're more balanced. And I also notice this when we start our day in a more rushed way. So if we're rushing out the door, or we don't start our day with a moment of quiet or peaceful relaxation, meditation, something like that. When we start our day rushing out the door, we also might start our day with a glucose spike, right? So again, might not be food. And what I sometimes see is it's the food and the rushing, right? You put those two together, and then it's just a recipe for the rest of the day being much harder to manage our glucose levels. And then so we finish the day with maybe a dinner that we think might be okay for us, but what's actually happening is it's our body is having a harder time with that meal, and then we end up having dysregulated blood sugar throughout the night. And it can take, depending on the person, an incident of having a glucose spike or a glucose crash. Our body actually needs to recover from that.
Mhm.
So depending on the person, we may need more time to recover.
Mhm.
Some people might bounce back pretty quickly. And I typically teach my clients that if you learn how to bring your body back in balance, and the longer you're able to stay there most of the time, a small, like an incident that spikes your blood sugar, or maybe you have a crash, is not going to have the same effect as it would if it's like that all the time,
Mhm.
right? So everybody's going to respond a little bit differently, but typically what I see is the more stable of a day, the more stable of a morning, the more stable of a day that you have. And then the more stable your glucose is when you sleep, and the more stable your glucose is when you sleep, the better stable your glucose is the next day.
The
So it's
next
all
day, yeah.
connected.
Because it's that thing, right? And I think we often see it after a crappy night's sleep. You can actually feel it the next day. Your body is gravitating to carbs, processed foods, quick
Mhm,
energy, right?
mhm.
Because it's already a little bit dysregulated. How about
Yeah.
it's just I'm taking the morning, starting slow. Um, how about foods? What do you recommend? Is there a recommendation? Is it very individual for people on how to start their? Should we fast? Should we have breakfast? Is there a recommendation, or is it really bio-individual?
I would say a lot of the times it comes down to the person's unique body. But most of the time, I think we're safe to say that if you're, however you start the day, whether that's, with breakfast at 9 a.m. or something to eat at 11 a.m., right? However your first meal of the day, we're most often better off having something that's going to keep our blood sugar stable. And
Mhm.
that typically will look like something with fat, fiber, and protein, and not something sweet, not, frosted flakes or a donut or
The
a
muffin,
muffin from
even the
Starbucks.
breakfast, right? They're called breakfast muffins, but they're not like.
or or a sweet drink from Starbucks, right? um or even a what you think is healthy smoothie that you've picked up at a local shop that has quite a bit of fruit in it, right? So thinking of something savory, I like to recommend having your protein in the morning, so finding a way to get protein and fiber in the morning. And fat, for a lot of women, also helps stabilize their blood sugars as well. So if you and we want to try to opt for foods that are anti-inflammatory for you, because additional inflammation can also make it harder for our body to stabilize our glucose levels. So having yes, a meal of fat, fiber, and protein in the morning, keeping the refined carbs and the carbohydrates to a minimum. And that is very individualized. And it also depends on what you're doing right afterwards, because for somebody who is more active in the morning, they might need, like if you're an athlete or you're going to go do a workout, you might need some carbohydrates before you do that, but it's up to you to figure out what you need to fuel that morning. And then when it comes to fasting can work for some women, but what I notice when it comes to glucose, we need to train our bodies slowly
Mhm.
to get there, because as you explained that you see sometimes at night with women's glucose dipping low, I notice that can happen in the mornings too. When you've been fasting for quite a few hours and you have also a stressful morning, or you're rushing in the morning, I don't find these two to go well together.
Mhm.
Fasting and any kind of stressful events tend to create glucose spikes, even if you haven't had any food. And so that's going against the purpose of fasting.
I
Right?
totally
Like
agree. I totally, and I think sometimes if you're somebody, and I used to be like that, when I went through my burnout, I was waking up anxious in the morning, like I was on the verge of panic attacks sometimes. And you know what? In the end, once I got my blood sugar in check, that was so much better. And you sometimes even feel that, like I can see it even in my son, because he sometimes in the mornings a little anxious, like, no, 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 let's just eat. Let's have the protein and the veggies. And then he's like, it balances out immediately. It's often
Mhm.
that there is that cortisol spike that we, like you described, we have that cortisol awakening response. It's supposed to give us energy, but if your blood sugar was too low in the morning and your body's doing like the extra double work on the cortisol, then you're just going to feel really anxious. And then some people and we know it, and it might be stressful as moms, getting out the door, getting everybody ready in the morning, and then you just have a coffee. That's all you do because you're already fried. You drink that coffee on an empty stomach.
Mm.
That's just gonna make it. Your
Yeah.
blood, your glucose monitor is probably gonna be like red flagging you.
Yeah, yeah. So fasting for a lot of women, especially when you have a morning that has more stress, and stress, like I say this and then some people say I don't really have a stress life, or I don't have a lot of stress, right? But our bodies are responding like who knows what stress is for our body, right? Because we may not feel like we have a lot of stress, but at the same time maybe we've adapted to the level of stress that
Mhm.
we have.
Mhm.
Maybe our body is under stress all the time, just from our lifestyle, and we don't consider that to be stress mentally, right? Like maybe we mentally and emotionally we do very well with that load that we have, but our body is under a stressful load, and it's responding in a stressful, it's having a stress response physiologically. So that's one thing that we have to consider. Um, and so I do see fasting not helping in this situation.
Mhm.
And then also you add coffee. And this can become a recipe for even more stress and really elevated glucose levels. And then the inability to keep stable glucose for the rest of the day, right? And then that affects our sleep. So these are all things to consider when you're trying to figure out, like, okay, like how do I keep more stable glucose throughout the day? And you had mentioned that you have some protein and vegetables for breakfast. That's my favorite breakfast. I
And
love
I'm
to eat
noticing.
leftovers.
Yeah, leftovers, and we switched, like we used to be the oatmeal family like a while back, and we used to oatmeal, blueberries, seeds. So there was some
Mhm.
fat in there. It wasn't that it was just pure fruit and carb, like not just carbs, like the fruit and the oats. But I wasn't doing well on it. I was hungry 2 hours later. I'm like, this is wrong. And then we switched to incorporate a lot more protein, and we basically do protein, so chicken or ground beef or something like that with sauteed veggies or roasted veggies from the night before. But I even noticed, like you were just saying with the fat, I always need, the guys don't so much, but I really need to have like a half an avocado or something with it, because otherwise it's still not, I would say, just satiating enough.
Mhm.
But that is kind of my feeling a little. If I can eat and then go like 3, 4 hours and I'm good, then I know I'm like, my blood sugar is okay. And then I'm going to get hungry again. Oh, yeah. Okay. Then I'm going to have to eat. But if I don't have that fat in there, that still doesn't last me very long.
Yeah, because the fat is probably also slowing down your digestion.
Yeah.
So it's helping to stabilize the release of that food into the bloodstream. So it's giving you that stable energy throughout the day, right? So you're not
Yeah.
having that, "Oh, okay, I had my food," and then it's like creeping down into the next meal, and then you start to feel it like, "Oh, I'm hungry now." But if you have that fat, it keeps it, and I've seen this for myself on the glucose monitor. Some of my best meals are like smoked or salmon, baked salmon and vegetables. I can have baked salmon and vegetables, and it's like I don't have any bump at all, and it's just perfectly stable. It stays at baseline. It's like la 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 la. We could stay here all day. And I love that. And I feel great, right? I also feel great with that meal.
Yeah. And I think the other one that I've noticed when I was wearing a CGM for a while is and I know that's not always possible for people, depending on how your day goes, but if I work out in the mornings, um, my body is a lot more forgiving with what I do throughout the day. Like if I, of course, I'm more hungry because I worked out if I didn't. But even if I then eat something that is something that would spike my blood sugar on the day that I don't work out, is just more forgiving. It's just using, I think, glucose generally in a more healthy way.
Yes. Yes, that can be true as well. I think so going back to starting your day with what you eat, but also what you do and how you do it matters too. And again, it's not just what, but how. I have to specify the how because I also see and I mentioned this before that exercise can actually create some pretty good like glucose spikes in women,
Mhm.
depending on how you do the exercise, right? How long, um, how intense. And even I've noticed that things like, like a gentle yoga practice or a meditation practice or any type of gentle movement practice can have the same effect on glucose levels for certain women as maybe a cardio session or a strength session might have for some women. So I think it is also beneficial to figure out what your body responds well to. And I would certainly say movement. Movement, if movement is healthy in helping our body better understand what to do with the glucose that it has, right? And then also, too, if you can find a restorative practice or a practice that helps get you into that relaxed state, even if you start your day that way, it can also set you up for having a more relaxed day in terms of stability with your glucose throughout the day as well. So any of those practices could be beneficial, and I always recommend trying to find what works for you. And two, if you are in a more high stress state in your body, and maybe you've had a high stress, like recently you've had a lot of stress in your life, or maybe you're under a lot of stress in your body. Perhaps you have chronic inflammation or pain, or you're dealing with an illness or something like that. Women in this state might find that the more gentler exercise is better for a moment to find more stable blood sugar than the more intense or more strenuous exercise in the morning, because your body is already under stress. So
Mhm.
we maybe don't want to add more to the plate or to the bucket. But again,
Absolutely.
it's finding what works for you, right? And also what works for you right now, because that could change.
That's fair. And I think um, I have one client right now, it's quite fascinating. They're using a CGM and they are not very, they have very wonky insulin and blood sugar. And they have just to make it easy, and we were talking about movement. Sometimes it's just walking, right? Like after a meal,
Mhm,
take a little while, then go just for a 10-15 minute walk. And they're always like, you know what? You can see the curve turn around. It's like the spike is actually like I'm
mhm,
walking and the thing stops and goes the other way. It goes back down. I'm like, yeah, it's like you're using the glucose, right? You're helping the body use what you just put into it, right? It's
mhm.
and it doesn't have to necessarily be, like you said, it doesn't have to be a super strenuous resistance training workout or anything. It could just be something that gets you moving, that gets the blood flowing, that gets the muscle to take up the glucose.
Yeah, a walk. A
Yeah,
walk works
yeah.
great in the morning.
Awesome. This has
Exactly.
been so helpful. Is there anything else you would like to share in terms of wonky blood sugar that we didn't cover that you think is important?
Well, um I think there are a lot of tools when it comes to finding better balance. So, what I like to say about blood sugar balance, there are like the disruptors, the things that can disrupt our glucose balance. We talked about stress, we talked about poor sleep, we talked about certain foods, inflammation. But then there are also what I like to call the glucose balancers. So there are plenty of things we can bring into our lives, and there are a lot of things maybe that are harder to eliminate, like stress, for example. We might not find it as easy to eliminate the stressors from our lives, but we can find it easier to bring in more balancers. And we talked about some of them already, like going for a walk, right? going for a walk, or just being more moving more in your day. And moving just means it could be, maybe you're doing some gardening, or maybe you're cleaning the house, or you're taking a walk break during lunch, or you're doing your meeting standing at your desk. Like, more movement can help balance our glucose better throughout the day, but as well as taking downtime for a lot of people. So having moments of rest, maybe a little bit of gentle breath work. I love legs up the wall.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know this yoga pose.
Yes.
It's a pretty popular one. Just legs. I've even tested a lot of these things for myself with a continuous glucose monitor to see how my body responds. But putting legs up the wall, it could be similar to a walk. Like, you see suddenly the shift of it coming back down. Maybe doing a few squats in your kitchen after dinner while you're doing the dishes, or after you finish the dishes. Maybe a wall sit could help as well. And then I like to think that, like, times of connection and joy, things that we enjoy that bring us joy, can also be great glucose balancers as well. And I also notice this when we take the time to have a nice meal with somebody we love and we enjoy their company. The environment that we're in when we eat can also drastically influence our glucose levels, in a positive way, if they are, if we're really having great company and great conversation, but also in a negative way if we're eating in a stressful or rushed environment. So also I just like to say, consider that there are things that will disrupt our glucose, but there are plenty and even more things that can support better balance. And that really lies in figuring out what helps your body feel good, to restore, to bring back balance. And a lot of times I think we know what those things are, right? It's just a matter of bringing more of those things back into our lives, right?
I totally agree. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of the things you just mentioned, I'm a huge fan of also for sleep, like taking these small breaks throughout the day, right? Whatever, whenever you're bringing that blood sugar and that cortisol and everything down a little, you're going to be
Mhm.
doing so much better at night. You're going to start processing information that you don't need to process when your head hits that pillow, right? It's just overall so good for us. We just have to make the effort. I think in the beginning it's effort because it's change, right? We just have to literally put it on the calendar and do it. And it doesn't have to be in half an hour. It can be 5 minutes, 10 minutes, just to
Mhm.
create that habit and see how good you feel. And then it will be a lot easier to keep doing it, right?
Yeah. And it can be easier to start with things that you love doing that maybe
Yeah,
haven't been doing very much of. It can be easier to bring back those things that you loved in your life, that can help you have more balance. And I know a lot of times too, it's having permission to take that nap when you're feeling like you need one right in the middle of the day. um, to know that it's okay. You can have the nap. You can have the nap, and you probably will be even more productive for the rest of your day after the nap.
yeah, absolutely.
Es-
Rest is not,
Especially,
go
yeah,
ahead.
especially if it helps you to regulate your glucose levels. Because, like we were saying, that can dysregulated glucose levels can affect our mood, our mind, all sorts of things.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. This was super,
Thank
super
you.
interesting. If people want to find out more about you, about your work, where can they find you?
Well, you can find me online. You can find me at my website, which is laurievillarreal.com. It's spelled Laurie, and then my last name is Villarreal, VILLARREAL.com. But probably the easiest way to find me is to go to yourbloodsugarquiz.com if you're curious to know more about maybe where your blood sugar levels are, and how, if you have a little bit of blood sugar wonkiness that could be affecting your body, your health, your hormones, I would suggest going to my quiz. It's at yourbloodsugarquiz.com. And then at the back of that quiz, I explain a little bit more about blood sugar health, and if you're interested in working with me or any of the programs that I do.
Great. And I'll drop the link in the show notes for sure. I did the test yesterday. It is super fun.
Oh, yay.
Do it, go and do it. It's really great. And I think it gives you also a great idea again of like symptoms and things to keep in mind and watch out for maybe in your life throughout the day. I think it was wonderful. So go check that out and do that quiz. And thank you so much again, Laurie, for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you everybody for listening and watching. And we will be back in 2 weeks. Thank you so much.